good morning or evening, whatever is relevant to you currently. Here in Australia, it is morning. Today I would like to address some fundamental Torah principles that we all need to hear again and again, especially during challenging times. Recently there was a meme going around. It read, "Sending love to all those who are stuck at home with their kids all day, and sending love to those who are alone and wish they had kids." Before Pesach this year, I encouraged people to reflect upon their blessings when they reach the portion in the Haggadah called Dayenu, whether it be their spouse, children, a roof over their heads, or children who may be physically distant from us, but thank God having children whom we can love. When I was very young, I heard an explanation of a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot that I have repeated numerous times. The Mishnah states, "Zehu ashir hasameach bechelka," who is rich, he who is happy with what he has. The word ashir, explains this particular commentary, can be broken up into the Hebrew letters Ayin, Shin, Yud, and Resh, each one standing for another limb in our body, representing Ayin, Einayim, eyes, Shin, Shinayim, teeth, Yud, Yadayim, hands, and Raglayim, legs. Who is rich? He who is truly satisfied with what he or she has and is grateful for the gifts in life that we take for granted. A few years ago, I experienced a severe back issue. I was practically immobile for 3 months. During this time, a friend of mine took me to the city to a specialist. I was in excruciating pain, and walking was extremely challenging, if not almost impossible. I was leaning on her to support me, and with every step I took, at some point, I remember not being able to continue to move forward, even with the support. For the first time in my life, I remember looking around at the hustle and the bustle of all the people in the city running backwards and forwards in many different directions. And the distinct thought in my head was, look at all these people going about their daily lives. They're so incredibly fortunate. They can walk, they can even run. And I was overcome with an incredible sense of gratitude for what we consider to be the basic gifts of life. All those years, walking and running, and taking it for granted. And I promised myself and Hashem that when I do get through this challenge, I would never take walking for granted again. In fact, now when I say the morning blessings and I say the prayer, Zokef Kafufim, a prayer to Hashem for making the bent stand upright, I stop and think about how lucky and fortunate I am to be able to stand upright and walk with no pain. And I feel gratitude in my heart to Hashem for helping me out in times of distress. In relation to the giving of the Torah, we read an interesting verse. Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses tells the people when speaking of Matan Torah, "Ki leva'avur nosais Elokim, eschem ba Elokim." Through this monumental event, Hashem is testing you. The Ramban, Nachmanides, asks, why is the giving of the Torah considered a test from Hashem? Precisely because it was such a miracle. It was a test for the Jewish people. How would we respond to this miracle? Would we be overwhelmed for the duration of the miracle and then forget about it shortly afterwards? Or would we find a tangible way to recall and acknowledge this miracle daily and appreciate the gift of Torah that Hashem has given us for eternity? The Tzemach Tzedek, the third Chabad Rebbe, writes that there are 5 different kinds of challenges that man contends with during his lifetime. These include temptations, like King David, the challenges of suffering, like Eov, and that would include health, challenges like Avraham Avinu, Abraham, our forefather, being called upon to sacrifice his son for Yiddishkeit, and other incongruous events that challenge our faith, for example, a false prophet, making a miracle. And finally, the challenge of Ashuras, the challenge of wealth. Sometimes this is the greatest challenge. The challenge is not just referring to material wealth. but it refers to how we deal with the blessings that God bestows upon us during our lifetime. Do we take these blessings for granted, or do we find a way to, so to speak, give back to Hashem? Do we simply feel entitled that God owes us our health, that he owes us all the blessings that we have been accustomed to expecting in our lives? We are all faced with life-altering events when Hashem talks to us. Now the entire world population is facing a life-altering event. We are forced to stop and to rethink about those very things that we have not really given sufficient thought to. At these times, we are forced to reevaluate our lives and hopefully refocus and concentrate on the blessings that we have, as opposed to what we are lacking. The Medrash tells us that the world was created for three purposes, referred to as Rashis. One of them being Rashis Arisasechem, the first of your fruits. This mitzvah is intrinsically connected to Shavuot, Chag HaBikurim, where we fulfill this mitzvah of Rashis, of bringing the first of our fruits to the Beis HaMikdash. Out of all 613 mitzvahs, God chose to emphasize the mitzvah of Bikurim to be a purpose in creation, more so than other mitzvot. Simply speaking, the foundation of life is gratitude and appreciation and recognizing the very source of life and the blessings that we have. And the antithesis of godly connection is an ingrate who clearly lacks humility and true recognition of Hashem. The entire practice of Yiddishkeit is based on this principle of gratitude. The blessings that we say every day, all of our festivals, recognizing the miracles of Hashem and remembering them, fulfilling the mitzvah of remembering the Exodus daily, the observance of Shabbos, our prayers, they're all founded upon the principles of humility and gratitude. Why is it that we have to be reminded of this principle every single day in so many different forms? Because simply speaking, human beings have a tendency to be ingrates. If you think about it, human nature has not changed from day one. The very first man, Adam, he sinned with the fruit in Gan Eden. Now it's very, very easy to judge him and to say in literally a few hours, how is it possible he couldn't control his evil inclination, his Yetzer Hara? Hashem had just given him life and placed him in the exquisite Garden of Eden. And before you know it, the only commandment he was entrusted with, he completely messed up. Chassidus explains that in actual fact, the greater a person is, the greater the temptations are. So perhaps, being the handiwork of God himself, with such an incredibly lofty soul, he was tempted in a way that we could never comprehend. Interestingly, though, there are commentaries that say it was not the sin of the forbidden fruit that resulted in him being thrown out of the Garden of Eden. It was his reaction to the sin. God says to him, "Where are you? What have you done?" And what does Adam respond? What does he say? "The woman that you gave me, she gave me the fruit, and I ate it." This, in fact, was the straw that broke the camel's back. Instead of taking ownership, he expressed a lack of gratitude to Hashem for his biggest blessing in life, his wife, and blamed her for his actions. Not only was he ungrateful, he turned the tables. Rashi calls Adam an ingrate. This is perhaps what Hashem found unacceptable. In the Medrash, Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, it is written, there is nothing harder for Hashem to live with, so to speak, than an ungrateful person. In fact, many years later, when a group of people built the famous Tower of Babel, the Torah refers to them as Bnei Adam, the sons of Adam. Why? because they were ungrateful to Hashem, just as Adam was ungrateful. The gratitude we express is noted by our children. It is noted by our grandchildren. And the lack of gratitude breeds self-centered children. The famous Ruth represents the epitome of loyalty and gratitude. After being left a poor widow, Naomi, her mother-in-law, offered her to return to her life of royalty, of wealth. Nevertheless, Ruth insisted on remaining Jewish and staying with her poverty-stricken mother-in-law. She was so grateful for her kindness and strong moral values and teachings. Think for a moment about how her loyalty and gratitude impacted her descendants. Her great-grandson was the famous King David, and ultimately, Mashiach himself comes from her. We need to honestly ask ourselves, what messages are we currently imparting on a daily basis to our children, particularly now as we ride the waves of challenging times? Our hearts are broken for those who are suffering, and everybody is being affected in some way. Despite the challenges, are we genuinely and sincerely grateful to Hashem for our blessings on a daily basis? Or do our children hear us complain non-stop about them being home, about the things we don't have, about the problems we face, about our fears, about our worries? We need to honestly dig deeply into our souls and think about what we talk most about. Our problems, that which we feel we currently lack, or our blessings, which we should never, ever forget. We all have problems, but what are we focusing on? What are our children hearing? What is our spouse hearing? We need to genuinely ask ourselves this question. The Lubavitcher Rebbe once commented, albeit sadly, how he receives thousands of letters on a weekly basis. But for the most part, people neglect to inform him when there is good news or when things have improved, and predominantly after he has given his blessings for things to turn around. The story is told of a grandma who watches her grandchild playing on the beach. A huge wave comes and washes him to sea, and she turns to God and she says, Hashem, please, please, save my grandchild. I'll do anything. I'll take on this mitzvah, that mitzvah, the other mitzvah. And suddenly a wave washes the boy back to the sea. And the grandma picks him up and she hugs him, and then she turns to God and says, Hashem. He was wearing a hat, you know. How typical is this of our reactions to life's events? How about the Jews in the desert? The Jews in the desert angered Hashem because they were bemoaning the good old days, and they complained about the gift of the man, focusing on what they felt they weren't being fed, the meager food that they had in Egypt. After 40 years of traveling in the desert, the Jews finally reached the borders of Canaan. They gazed afar at the beautiful orchards, the vineyards, and the wheat fields. It was an exquisite yet strange sight, especially for the children who were born in the desert. All they had seen their entire lives was sand, rock, and sparse vegetation. What an amazing sight for these kids. So one little boy looked up at his mother and said, Imma, what are all the things we're looking at? And his mother said, oh, you see those big brown wooden pillars? They're called trees. The beautiful round fruits, they're called apples. And oranges, they have a sweet taste. Those stalks you see blowing in the wind, the grain inside, it's called wheat. It's ground, it's mixed with other ingredients, it's baked in an oven, and when it's done, it becomes a food we call bread. And little Moshe says to his mother, Mummy, I might be young, but I'm not that naive. It's a lovely fairy tale. but I know how things really work every day of my life. I see how God has given us manna from heaven, double on Fridays for Shabbat. I see how God rains down quail that we ate. We drank from Miriam's well that followed us through our entire trip across the desert. Those things I understand, Emma, because they are so natural. But these fantasies about big pillars coming out of the ground, grain and fruits coming from tiny seeds, give me a break. Those miracles don't happen. Now, I'm not sure if the story happened or not, but it certainly happens to us every single day. Are our daily blessings any less spectacular than bread raining down from heaven? Is it inherently any less miraculous? Or is it only our own subjective experience of what is natural and what is miraculous? What does the word Jew come from? It's derived from the name Yehuda, Judah. What does Yehuda mean? As Yehuda's mother Leah said when she named him, Hapam Oda Es Hashem, I shall praise and give thanks to God. Yehuda connotes appreciation and gratitude. Our very existence as Jews bears testimony to God's miracles. This is a Jew. The second a Jew opens his or her eyes and realizes that he or she has been given another day of life on earth, he invokes his Yehuda. He or she says, Moide Ani, thank you Hashem for restoring my soul to me. And then 3 times a day we say the Moedim prayer, Moedim Anachnu Loch. Thank you Hashem, reminding us to express gratitude. The challenge, the mandate of Yehuda is to recognize and be grateful for our miracles and our blessings. The blessings we see all around us, each and every day, in spite of the things we don't have. Do we do an adequate job of letting Hashem know how much we appreciate what we actually do have? In fact, interestingly enough, did you know that the only prayer in the Amidah that the Chazan recites on behalf of the congregation, that the congregation needs to join in simultaneously, is the Moedim prayer, the thank you prayer? This is very significant because we cannot rely on other people to offer thanks on our behalf. We must thank Hashem ourselves. King Chizkiyahu was one of the most righteous Jewish kings. Unlike other Jewish kings, many whom were very corrupt. He was so righteous that God wanted to appoint him as Mashiach, the sages tell us. One amazing story which highlights his greatness was when Sancheriv laid siege on Jerusalem, and he did not lose faith. He turned to God and he prayed. The situation was extremely grim, but a great miracle was desperately needed. Indeed, in his merit, Hashem performed a great miracle, and the entire army of Sancheriv was killed by heavenly angels. However, he made one wrong choice, and that had to do with thanksgiving. The prophet Ishayahu advised Chizkiyahu to offer praise and proclaim God's miracles. Chizkiyahu argued, that's unnecessary to proclaim God's praise for his miracles. They were already widely known throughout the world. Because of his choice not to offer praise, he was seen as unfit to be Mashiach. The Talmud says, God wished to appoint Chizkiyahu as Mashiach and Sancheriv as Gog and Magog. However, the attribute of justice said before God, Sovereign of the universe, if you did not make King David, who had uttered so many psalms and praises before you, Mashiach, will you appoint Chizkiyahu as such when he did not praise you in spite of all the miracles which you performed for him? So we need to ask ourselves the question, do we show sufficient gratitude to Hashem? In addition, another dimension of gratitude is expressing appreciation to those who reach out to us during times of loneliness, during times when we're feeling vulnerable, during our difficult and challenging moments. Gratitude towards our fellow man. Story told about a kind and generous barber. He was in a really good mood one day. First customer was a local baker. The barber wanted to express his gratitude to the baker, so he decided to give the baker a free haircut. Next morning he came to work and he found a dozen freshly baked donuts on his doorstep, along with a note of gratitude from the baker. He was so encouraged and he felt so good, he decided to give the first customer of the next day a free haircut and a free donut. Customer was a florist. The florist was delighted. The next morning the barber came to work and found a dozen fresh roses at his doorstep, with a note of gratitude from the florist. He really encouraged the barber and he made him feel even more grateful about life. Even more so than the previous day and the day before. He was so overjoyed by his good fortune, he decided to give another free haircut to whoever might be the first customer of that day. Very soon the rabbi walked in. The barber gave him a free haircut and a rose to give to his wife. The rabbi was delighted and he thanked him profusely, and that night, when the barber closed his shop, he wondered what good fortune might befall upon him the next day. The next morning, when the barber came to work, a dozen rabbis were waiting at his doorstep. In all seriousness, what does the Torah say about how we express gratitude towards our fellow man? The first 2 of the 10 plagues that befell Egypt revolved around water. In the first plague, the waters of Egypt turned into blood. The second plague had frogs emerge from the water. Now, in order to generate these miraculous events, Moshe's staff struck the waters of the Nile River. But Moshe did not strike the water himself. He was instructed by Hashem that his brother Aaron should do the striking. In addition, when it came to hitting the earth to bring forth lice, Hashem instructed Aaron to do it, not Moshe. Why Aaron? Why did Aaron have to do it? Why didn't Moshe do it? He orchestrated the last of the plagues, why not the first? The sages tell us that Moshe could not strike the water because as a little infant, the waters of the Nile were his refuge. He was hidden in a reed basket from Paro's soldiers who were drowning all the Jewish male children. It would not be fitting for one who was saved by the water to strike it. With regards to the plague of lice, after striking the earth with his staff, lice emerged, afflicting all of Egypt. But Moshe was told once again not to be that agent of transmutation. He wasn't going to be the one to strike the earth. After all, he needed to be grateful because the earth had hid the Egyptian taskmaster whom he had killed while the Egyptian was beating a Jewish slave to death. Let's think about it. Water and earth, they're inanimate. They don't have feelings. Would they know the difference if they were struck or not? And would they care who would do the striking? Yet Moshe was instructed by Hashem not to strike him, not to strike them, because they were there for him in his life. What is more, Moshe was 80 years old at the time of the plagues. The incidents with the water and the earth occurred when he was a mere infant and when he was a very young man. And yet all these years later, he needed to be sensitive and not to strike the objects that had helped him. He did not say, like so many say, "What have you done for me lately?" That wasn't the message that he was told to have in his life. That wasn't the message he gave to us many generations later. This gives us an incredible lesson on the importance of gratitude. If we ought to show gratitude towards water, towards earth, how much more so towards human beings who have been there in our lives. In the words of the Talmud, do not, water that has given you water to drink, do not throw stones into that water. In contrast, Paro was a true ingrate. Yaakov blessed Paro when he left his presence. What did Yaakov bless him with? He said to him, "Whenever you approach the Nile, it would rise before you as if greeting you." Now the Nile was a source of irrigation for the entire country. The water would welcome Paro and then flow into the canals to irrigate the Egyptian soil. What did Paro do to the Nile in return? The Torah states that each morning he would go out to the Nile. Why? To use the Nile as an outhouse, so people should not know he was human, as he claimed to be a god. That's how he repaid the Nile. And of course, the fact that he enslaved Yaakov's descendants into slavery, it showed a complete sense of ingratitude. According to the Torah, how do we approach someone who has dealt kindly with us? The Torah tells us, "Kol ha'kofer b'tovasa shel chaveroi, sofer sheyichper b'tovasa shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu." He who doesn't acknowledge the good another does for him will eventually deny the good that Hashem does for him as well. If an inanimate object, we have to be careful even with inanimate objects, how much more so with living beings, how much more so with human beings, our relationship with others. And ultimately, this impacts our relationship and our attitude towards Hashem himself. And this is a cardinal principle of the Torah. There's something a little bit deeper even about the story of the Nile River and Moshe Rabbeinu. The Nile did not do any special favors for Moshe. The Nile was merely doing its job and enabling the basket to float. This is the nature of water. The river didn't go out of its way at all. And yet, even then, Moshe expressed gratitude. People say, "Why do I need to thank you? Why should I thank this person? They didn't go out of their way. In fact, he or she was just doing their job. That's what they're meant to do. That's what they're employed to do. That's what they're supposed to do for one reason or another." The answer is that we benefited from that person, whether it's their job or whether it's not their job. When someone gains something from someone else, regardless of whether they went out of their way or whether it was their job or whether it wasn't, the beneficiary has a responsibility to recognize the favor and to show gratitude. The proof is the Nile River. It merely did what water does, yet Moshe was eternally grateful. This is why the Torah tells us, "Do not despise an Egyptian because you were a stranger in his land." Rashi says why? Why is this the case? Because they gave you hospitality during a time of need. Now, interestingly, the context of this law is the topic of Jewish marital law. Although converts are wholeheartedly accepted into the Jewish nation and are given the right to marry any Jew. There are some exceptions. As the Jews were about to enter the Promised Land, Moshe addressed them as a nation, and he told them the following: certain nations who committed crimes against the Jewish people may not marry into the Jewish nation. The nations of Ammon, nations of Moab, may never marry into the Jewish people, whereas other nations for only a limited period of time. One would think Egypt should be on the list, on the banned list. After all, they enslaved us, they tortured us for centuries. Surprisingly, the Torah permits a Jew to marry a third-generation Egyptian convert. Why? Because we were guests in Egypt, in their land, and they hosted us during a time of need. That's incredulous. The Egyptians were like the Nazis. They tortured us. They forced us to bury our babies in fresh cement. They beat us mercilessly, murdered our innocent children. Yet we need to be grateful for their hospitality? Because we Jewish people expect more from ourselves. The Torah teaches us the priceless lesson that appreciation must be given, even when the recipient has also done us a multitude, even when he's done us a multitude of disservices as well. Regardless of all the evil, regardless of the evil that Egypt tortured us with, a favor is a favor, and gratitude must be shown, because a kindness should never ever be forgotten. Why did they host us in their land anyway? Probably for self-centered reasons. Wasn't altruistic. To enslave us, to use us. We might say, this person's only doing me a favor because they have an ulterior motive. They benefited from this favor for whatever reason. Some children develop the same attitude towards their parents. Why should I respect and honor my parents? It was their choice to bring me into this universe. It was their choice to have me, so it's their responsibility to look after me. In fact, it was all for their own fulfillment and joy. We may say the same of Hashem. Why do I owe anything to God? He created me. He has to provide for me. But the Torah says, no, that is not the case. There are plenty of people with the noblest of intentions, but until they actually do something, you could starve to death. Others may not be perfect, but if you have gained something from them, that is the bottom line. We have a responsibility to say thank you and to genuinely feel it and mean it. Honoring parents is one of the 10 Commandments and one of the few mitzvahs which the Torah states we have a reward for: long life. Because there's one thing your parents gave you can never give back to them, and that is life itself. And when a person appreciates what his parents have given him, this gives Hashem tremendous nachas. And of course this applies to everyone. It is so important to Hashem that we show our gratitude and thanks to those who show kindness to us, and not to take it for granted or lack appreciation. It's human nature to be kafui tov, to lack appreciation. Kafui also means forced. Many people don't like to show gratitude because they don't like to feel indebted, forced to acknowledge the good someone else did for them. People don't like to feel they needed others. Why was Moshe Rabbeinu, who had 10 names, called by the name of Moshe, the name that Batya, the Egyptian princess, called him? Again, to teach us gratitude to the woman who saved his life. Why did Moshe not want to go to Paro's palace as Hashem's messenger? Could be a number of reasons, but also possibly it was difficult for him to be ungrateful, to be seen to be ungrateful to Paro, in whose house he was raised. From Moshe Rabbeinu, we learn how to show gratitude. And this is the lesson. This is the lesson we need to learn. This is the lesson for us every single morning when we wake up and take our first steps into the promised land of our relationships, into our work, into our aspiration, into our tasks. This is a lesson for us as we navigate difficult times, we need to look around. We need to appreciate every breath, every human being that we are blessed to have in our life, every blessing as a miracle from Hashem, and express that appreciation. I'd just like to finish off with a story. And this story was told about a rabbi, Rabbi Eliyahu Lapin, who was raising funds for his yeshiva in England. He once visited one of England's wealthiest Jews. The man was known to contribute to any yeshiva or any rabbi that came to solicit funds from him. But he wasn't the least bit observant. The rabbi was treated with royalty, with tremendous dignity, and he decided he was going to ask him why. What drives him? What motivates him to give so much tzedakah to religious institutions? The man said, "My parents were very wealthy and equally religious. I was an extremely rebellious child. The religion didn't really interest me. In the early years between the two wars, many youth my age left Judaism. And my parents wanted me to go to the yeshiva of the Chafetz Chaim, one of the great Torah luminaries of this generation in the Polish city of Radin. I wasn't interested, but I agreed to take the exam, and I failed with flying colours, and of course I was very happy about it because I didn't want to go to the yeshiva. But I had one request. I needed to sleep over for the night. I needed somewhere to stay. So I asked the rabbi who'd interviewed me, "Can I stay the night?" And he didn't know how to respond. He didn't know what to say. I think he was scared to have me for a night in the yeshiva. Maybe I'd influence the other boys negatively or whatever reason. So he decided to consult with the Chafetz Chaim. What should he do with me? The Chafetz Chaim said to both of us, "A boy that cannot be in the dorm for 1 year cannot be in the dorm for 1 night. But that does not mean that he cannot stay in my home." The Chafetz Chaim took me to his home, and he looked after me like I was his only son. He made a bed for me. He wanted to make sure I was comfortable. He gave me food. And a few hours into the night, I heard the door open, and I heard him say, "Oi, it's so cold in here." And he took his coat, and he took it off himself, and he put it on top of me, and he tucked me in. I left the next day. I never looked back. And eventually, I left Judaism completely. But one thing I will tell you, the coat that old rabbi put on me during that chilly night still gives me warmth. During our darkest moments, during our challenging times, let's focus on appreciating the love that we receive from others around us and warm our hearts and fill our souls with joy and gratitude for Hashem's blessings in our lives. And that's what we should think about and remember on a daily basis. And in doing so, we will also be able to face the challenges that we're experiencing with added humility and a heightened perspective, which will hopefully help us ride the waves that we are currently riding. Thank you so much for joining me.